Take Ryan Nobles live here. Good morning, Ryan Nobles. Good morning.
Hey, Bill. How are you this morning?
Good. Listen, there's no shortage of activity with the president away in Washington. What's happening? And there's more to come today, it seems.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest development this morning is that the president seems to be ready to retain outside private counsel to deal with all the stuff related to Russia.
That's big.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's big because, I mean, the big thing is that, you know, he does have lawyers that work for him and work for the White House. The White House counsel, Don McGahn, is the head of that. And that's somebody that is loyal to the president and who the president appointed. But those particular people, because they work for the government, do not necessarily have attorney-client privilege. So could be some situations there where they might be in compromising positions. So the president may need outside counsel for the situation. So it looks like he's heading in that direction. You've got this special counsel now and Robert Mueller from the FBI. You still have both these investigations from the House and Senate. So, Bill, there's no doubt that the issue with Russia is still a huge cloud that hangs over the administration, even though he's had, a relatively error-free trip abroad up until this point.
Yeah, it has been a very good trip for the president. And traditionally, these foreign trips are good for a president that's in the midst of maybe some turmoil. It's still, you hear from supporters, there is still that very strong 38, 39, 40%, whatever it might be, that are really feel that this is all made up and that the media is harassing this president and that it all should just go away. What do you say to that?
You know, I think the best example of the fact that 38 to 39% remain loyal to the president is that you don't see Republicans starting to break from him en masse. You know, Republicans seem to be a little bit more critical and maybe a little bit more questioning of some of his motives and exactly what's going on, but you don't see any of them, ready to basically hang this president out to dry. They're not that far yet.
Yeah.
And, to the critics who say that the media is just harassing a president, you had the director of national intelligence, the former director of national intelligence, in an open hearing yesterday refuse to rule out the fact that there may have been some evidence of collusion between a foreign government and a candidate for president who ended up winning. That's just one example of a mountain of examples of issues that have happened with this White House, and I can't imagine that any journalist worth their salt would just ignore it.
Yeah.
So, if you don't want to believe the reports, I guess you don't have to believe the reports, but I guess this investigation is going to play out, and hopefully at the end of it we'll get some sort of clarity.
And just before Manaski, I just want to, it's something I've been talking about for the last few weeks. The criticism is, which I'm offended by, is all media. I understand the media can be rough, but that's just a part of our system. Our system isn't pretty always. As the president goes overseas, he's not getting any of these hard-hitting questions because they don't have the free speech and the free expression that we have in this country. We should value that because without that, you wouldn't be placing these political figures, not just this president, but all of them, on their toes, right? I mean, I think it's so important.
And Bill, and I'm not immune to the criticism of the media. I think that we've, as a collective group, have maybe not done our best work over the past 10 years, and that's perhaps what has led us to be vulnerable to this type of charge and the lack of trust that we have by many in this country, and that's on us. We've got to do a better job. But I actually had a really robust discussion with a bunch of high school students a couple of days ago about their perception of the media and their perception of how this particular story is being covered. And I just think that we live in such an on-demand culture now where you can decide and pick and choose where you get your news from, and you can decide and pick and choose what you believe and what you don't believe. And I think it's really a lot up to the consumer of news to be a little bit challenging of your own worldview and to say, okay, my thought about this is one thing, but I want to read every possible article that's written about this to draw a conclusion so that I can get as much information as possible. And then, take a look at the track record of the news organizations that have reported this story. I mean, when you look at the stuff that's been revealed by the Times and by the Washington Post and by us at CNN, the president himself has confirmed a lion's share of those. Even when his advisors go out and deny, he will come back with a tweet the following day and basically confirm the essence of a lot of these reports. So, I mean, I think when you can be upset with an article in the short term or one individual report, but I think if you look over the long term, many of these long-held institutions with a lot of credibility have been pretty much right from the very beginning.
And some of these things, Ryan, we have to you have to acknowledge that it's easy to blame the media, easy to blame Democrats, but some of these things would not get out without some leaks coming from Republicans.
Well, I mean, Bill, and this is why I think the president is so upset. There is someone or a group of people inside the White House who have regular interaction with the president on a very regular basis, who are the source.
They're leaking this stuff, and that's not necessarily carryovers from Obama. These are people that the president has put in.
I mean, keep in mind the bombshell report that the Post had about what the president said in his conversation with those two Russian leaders, Lavrov and Kislyak. You know, the White House has never denied the substance of that report. They denied other things that weren't a part of that report. And those two reporters that collected that evidence, they have two sources that were inside the Oval Office when that conversation took place. So this isn't like they got a copy of a transcript after the fact, or that they heard from someone who heard from someone. They have sources inside the room. So yes, there are a group of people or individuals who are inside that White House who are concerned about the way the president is conducting himself, and that's why they're leaking this information to the press. Now, there's reports that he may clean house, that the White House has identified who some of these people are, and some of them may be losing their jobs when he comes back from his foreign trip. We'll have to see if that happens. But I mean, you're right. There isn't some sort of liberal mole inside the White House that's blowing this whole thing up.
And I got to tell you, I think House of Cards with Kevin Spacey is going to be boring because they can't top this crap. They just can't. Manansky.
I guess I don't want to stick on this for too much longer, but at what point does the question of was there collusion to we have evidence of collusion, when does that happen? What's a realistic explanation? When is
Could
forgive
be a year.
me.
I hate to
when
say
is
it.
the left-wing media just harassing the president with this story if there's no evidence of it?
Jeff, I mean, it's a great. You raise a great point. You know, at what point does this story end? And I don't know. Is the simple answer to that, because this is going to be a process. You know, we kind of going back to what I said before about living in this on-demand culture. We also want immediate answers to our questions.
Right.
And this is not a simple situation here. You have a very complex issue that involves a number of moving parts, people that are not necessarily going to want to be forthcoming about their role or their interactions during that period of time. And you have all these different investigations going forward. And, you know, at some point, the goal would be that one of these investigations delivers some sort of definitive conclusion about what happened here.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you now, when you've got a guy named Robert Mueller, who's a former FBI director, who's now taking charge of the special counsel, which is essentially the Department of Justice and the FBI's investigation into this. Mm-hmm. He is a very deliberate and methodical person. This is not somebody that's going to like rush in here and slap together 2 weeks worth of what's been collected and you know, make some sort of declaration. He could take 6 months, a year. He could take 2 years going through all this information before he makes some sort of conclusion.
And that's the reason they didn't want an independent, call them what you want, counselor, whatever, is because they know that this will end up lingering through into the midterms, most likely.
And it could uncover other things that aren't even the initial source.
Well, that's what happened with Clinton. That's how Lewinsky popped up. There was an investigation. It was,
right.
This is
I think, but Jeff, just let me make this point to wrap this up. I almost wonder that that we may never have that answer definitively, but yet we have some sort of an end to the Trump presidency, if you know what I mean. Either the investigation lingers on into the next election and he doesn't get reelected and then we just kind of forget about it, or something happens in the midterms where Democrats take control and then they attempt some sort of an impeachment process, or the heat gets so much that he just decides to resign. I almost think that that's a more likely outcome.
Right.
And then he can almost declare victory at that point, right? He can just say, well, I was a victim here,
right,
and everybody was out to get me, It's not my problem anymore. I didn't do anything wrong, and his supporters will maintain that belief. But yet, the presidency will come to some sort of an end.
And then he'll be able to go on and do what he really thought he was going to do when Hillary won,
Right.
which never, whether it was a TV network or whatever, quickly ended.
Ryan, that was a segue into what I want to ask about. I guess, when will the Congress and the Senate allow the special investigator to do their job and get to, is this the number one thing on their minds and their priority list? I mean, what progress is being made in other aspects of the country, like national security and health care?
Yeah.
When will they stop bringing in people to ask them the same questions and get the same answers?
Well, I think, Andrew, Republicans in Congress are breathing somewhat of a sigh of relief that you have this special counsel in place, because that takes a little bit of the heat off of them.
Yeah.
So they're going to let Robert Mueller do his job, and they're going to want him to do his job. But that's not going to stop both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Democrats are not going to just let Republicans drop these inquiries. They're going to continue to move forward. So I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think it's ever going to stop. I mean, I think you're going to continue to. I mean, you're probably going to have James Comey testify in front of an open session. You might have Carter Page testify in front of an open session. These will all be covered.
Yeah.
In totality on television and in newspapers and on the internet. So, I mean, you're right, Andrew. It makes it very difficult to get things like tax reform and Obamacare and all these things done, because this is the dominant issue in Washington.
And, I think that people do deserve to hear a Comey sit before Congress and answer the questions, although oftentimes he says, I can't answer that question. But I'm not sure, even though he's great at that, but I'm not sure he's agreed. I'm not sure that Mueller ends up preventing that from actually happening. That might not happen.
I don't know if he can, Bill. I mean, I think that, the Senate Intelligence Committee has a layer of authority that goes above and beyond Mueller.
Mm-hmm.
They have subpoena power, so they can call anybody in as part of their investigation that they want. The FBI investigation is independent, but maybe perhaps Mueller might sit with Richard Burr and Mark Warner, the chairs of that committee, and say, listen, it might be better for both of us if we don't bring him up in front of open session. I think we've already crossed that bridge. I think, to your point, Bill, Comey has got to testify in front of some sort of open session.
We need to see that.
There's too much of a thirst to learn exactly what he knows.
We deserve that. And by the way, great interview CNN had with Comey's father. Got him to say that Trump was afraid of him. And we spoke with him. Andrew spoke with him just the other day, and we thought we had him coming on. But apparently his son gave him the no. Yeah. No more interviews.
I believe
so. You got the only one. He finally started hanging up on us when we were calling him. So that's
he
all.
He doesn't seem to have the same level of decorum when it comes to interviews as his
I
son does.
I told him, but I told him we were from Fox News. He still hung up on me. I don't know. It's crazy. All right. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan Nobles, correspondent in Washington for CNN. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.